I've been working on my game Mana Valley for 3 years, and since last year's update, boy do we have a lot to catch up on. As a quick recap, in year 1, I knew I wanted to make a witch-themed RPG, so I explored ideas and mechanics around that theme and developed the game's identity. By year 2, I had a pretty clear vision of what I wanted the game to be, which unfortunately meant the game had some major reworks to go through. This past year, year 3, I focused on connecting things into an experience, and that meant working on lots of things that no one will ever notice. But those things, I think they're actually the most important things. Games are built on thousands and thousands of tiny decisions, and most of them no one will ever notice, and that's kind of the point. In a good game, you're not constantly thinking about the features. You're experiencing the game. Most of the time, you never even realize you're being guided. Dialogue, UI, the environment, yellow paint. The moment these things don't exist or fail to be effective, the player's immersion breaks. And if you know anything about game dev, you might be tempted to call these things polish or scope creep, which to me has always suggested that those things aren't important. But it's taken me 3 years to realize just how wrong that is. This was the first year I had anyone test the game. It was a big milestone. And to ease myself into it, I limited testers to other developers. I figured that they would be able to see past the rough edges. Even still, it became immediately clear that I had a problem. A few years ago, when I introduced the console, I mentioned how much it helped. That's still true, but I've also become too reliant on it. Need an item? Just type in give item. Need currency? Type give currency. Flailing endlessly through the world as if it's a metaphor for life itself with no clear direction, no way to stop, and enough time to wonder if you were ever in control to begin with at all? You stuck. It got to the point where I was focused on communicating the commands and item IDs. There's even a site that lists them all. And that's fine as a band-aid, but that's what it is, a band-aid. I needed more focus on everything being available through standard gameplay. Like the console didn't exist at all. But if the console doesn't exist, how do we get items? Now, I know this seems trivial, but take a second and actually answer the question. In a game, how do you get items? One way is through enemies. Enemies drop items. This exists in Mana Valley, but have you ever noticed that enemies typically drop a limited number of items? Usually the kind of items are tied to the kind of enemy they are. This little guy is a Pompaloo, and he looks like he might drop seeds, leaves, or if you're really lucky, an occasional equipable item. Maybe a low-level wand or something. It doesn't feel right for him to drop something like a stone wall, does it? We would need a new thematic enemy for that, something like a golem. Even still, we can't just pile all of the items for the game into enemy loot tables. No one wants to kill hundreds of the same enemy just so they can get a few walls and floors to build a house. So I added shops, but these have a similar issue to enemies. We can't just fill shops with all of the items in the game. They also need to be category specific. This is like Game Dev 101. Not that I would know, I've never taken a game dev class in my life, but we're simply giving the player items. That's it. But there's a lot of complexity in trying to do that in unique and creative ways. Giving items through enemy loot works. Adding shops to that is good, but the more variety we can add, the better. You can also harvest resources or find things laying around. You can get rewards from quests. And recently, I added challenges in an arena. You defeat waves of enemies, and after each wave, decide if you want to keep going or claim the current tier's reward. If you've seen some of my other videos, you might be thinking, what do you mean new arena? Okay, fair. I've actually had the arena developed for a while. It just got some major improvements and isn't a separate game mode anymore. There's a portal the player can go through to get to the arena and then one to bring them back. They work slightly differently because the portal to go to the arena costs some rupees. If Alabaster has to guard the portal to make sure none of the enemies get out, how else do you expect him to feed his family? The one to come back just has a zone that starts a 3-second timer. As a system, this is pretty cool because it allows me to introduce any kind of instance. Anyway, back on the topic of enemies. You don't always need to defeat them for them to provide loot. I know you guys love the Pompaloos, but I finally started adding new mobs. These little guys are called Cluckadoos, and they periodically lay eggs the player can collect. You may or may not also be able to throw them. but you just can't keep piling on items forever. Selling items at the appropriate shops for money helps. Lots of games use crafting to convert items into other valuable or specific items. I'm still on the fence about crafting. At one point I planned on adding it, but then thought it might reduce the value of shops. I still do plan on adding alchemy, which is basically the same system as crafting, so I think it would be easy to do if I wanted to, so we'll see. But I'd love to know what you guys think. In the meantime, there's an immediate use for items through the sell box. No matter what, you can always put items in the box and go to sleep to sell off items at a baseline price. Sleeping not only sells your items, but refreshes resource spawns. The seed for the random resources is tied to the day, so there'll always be something new to find. I thought it was a fun way to make every day fun to explore. I know it could be kind of annoying if you're looking for something specific, so I've made different zones where things can spawn. So if you find a mushroom in an area, you can go back there on a new day in hopes of finding another one. I think it gives the best of both worlds, providing variety within a range of expectation. At first I thought I would have to teach this, but actually players naturally go back to the same location they found things when they're looking for it again. The resource may not be in the same location, but there's a good chance they see it along the way or nearby. Players don't actively notice this feature, but it's ingrained in the way that we think and makes exploring more exciting. Other things I've been working on aren't ingrained in our DNA, but instead are things we've come to expect from popular games. I've always held the Minecraft inventory system up as the holy grail of inventory systems. I always intended to implement similar features like splitting stacks and transferring full stacks. But until this year, Mana Valley has only allowed moving single items. I saved it as a task to do as a reward for myself when testers would start to ask for it. I never really cared for the item details display in Minecraft, so from the beginning, I've had my own version of that. But just that subtle difference is where things get weird. Because Mana Valley doesn't have a hotbar, over time, I've added functionality for items into this details panel. When I finally went to implement the dragging and stacking, I realized I couldn't. You might be like me and have never realized that Minecraft's inventory actually uses a toggle click. When you click on an inventory item, it gets picked up, and it stays picked up until you click again. In Mana Valley, when you click an inventory item, it doesn't actually get picked up, it gets selected and shows the details display. This made perfect sense for the system that I developed. The details display is important because it has buttons to use the items because I don't have a hotbar. All that to say, I did add stacking and splitting, and it is inspired by Minecraft, but it's not exactly like it. Left click dragging an item will move one, right click dragging will move a stack, and while items are held, right clicking will place all items being dragged, left clicking will split the stack. I know this is a bit nuanced, but I bring it up because I'm worried the system is close enough to Minecraft to create the expectation that it works the same, but there's subtle differences. Testers have only said good things about it, so maybe I'm just overthinking, but it's an interesting dilemma. Obviously, I'm not making a Minecraft clone, so there's a point where taking inspiration from it will depart. But deciding where that departure point is critical. Remember, games are made of thousands of tiny decisions. That's why when I asked players what the most impactful change in year 3 was, they had a hard time articulating it. Of course, there's easy stuff to point to, like the large systems I implemented, like dialogue and quests. There's now a sigil page in the spell book that lets players see what spells they've learned and decide which ones are active. I planned out all the spells for the game, created unique icons for each one, and implemented a scroll system for players to learn new ones. I made improvements to enemies so that they can be created more easily. And now behavior can be selected with a simple drop-down. A scuttle is aggressive, a cluckadoo will run away from you but attack if you hurt it, and a bovis will ignore you until you attack it and then will try to flee to safety. I improved the camera so that in tight spaces it defaults to a first-person view and then automatically reverts back to third person. I added new levitate and star sight spells, which is a real-time map you can see the location of shops and NPCs in. I expanded building, adding roofs, windows, doors, columns, stairs, fireplaces, railings, fences, gates, wells, and chests. What players are actually able to make with this stuff is actually so cool. I added timed events so we can have day-specific things like trick-or-treating. I cleaned up thousands of errors and warnings, and just generally overall improved the game's performance. Hedgebyte can now run the game smoothly on a laptop with an integrated GPU, and it's not a targeted release platform, but he was also able to get it working on mobile. Those things are all super cool and exciting to me, but I think the moments where the game feels incredibly special are way more subtle. A time that stands out was while I was testing a quest. The quest is to repair a wall. While I was repairing it, I heard some footsteps on the gravel behind me. For a second, I had forgot that I had set up one of the NPCs to roam the island as a test. I don't get these moments often because I'm building it, so I know everything. But it was an immersive moment that made the game come to life. Another time I built a pen and filled it with cluckadoos, but when I opened the gate, they all tried to rush out and run away. I'd love to say I purposefully thought about adding those moments, but the truth is I didn't. Sure, I created the things that allowed it to happen, but the game is starting to have so many overlapping layers that even I can't anticipate everything. It's an incredible place to be as a developer, to feel like I'm simply unveiling a world that already knows what it is. And at this point, I feel like we're all kind of figuring it out together. If you're even half as excited about this game as I am, I encourage you to go wishlist it on Steam. There's a link down in the description. This project has come an incredibly long way. If you don't believe me, just check out this video from a year ago.